Hello ladies, I'm honored that you've come to Homemakers Radio. I'm Mrs. Sherman and I have a post where I am embedding this video, so I'd like for you to click the link and go over there to listen, because then you can see who's on my blog roll and also enjoy the comments of the other ladies. I don't have comments here on the channel, but you can leave a comment if you like, and you can also email me. Now we start out with a little pep talk on your preparation. And preparation is more than just your appearance, because it is also a mental and heart preparation of the heart, to go and get yourself ready to bathe and to do your hair and fix yourself up so that you're pleasant. And if you have to, be aware that the house and the home is the most important place on this earth for you. There isn't anything more important, and the world is not going to give us any peace. So you've got the power to give peace within your own house. And of course, maybe you can't control people, you can't control their moods and their attitudes, and you can't control the things that they say to you, but you can control some things. And so being a homemaker puts you in charge of making your home pleasant so that you can stand to be in it and so that you will enjoy it. And Mr. S is from an old-fashioned era, and he encouraged me when we first got married to get the place the way I liked it, because I would have to be in it more. And so he's happy to appreciate what I have done here. And we didn't always live in the best of places, but I always tried to make the best of it. And so to begin with, we start with your preparation, and it's your way you dress and the way you think. And I always think that it helps to go to your bathroom, get bathed, get dressed, and get in front of the mirror, start fixing your hair, and then have a look at yourself look yourself in the eye and see if you have dullness, if you have bitterness, if you have a lightness and a freshness, and if you may, a youthfulness, because youthfulness is like innocence. And if you are full of the labor of the day and you are weary, you can see it in your eyes. But in the morning when you get dressed, if you have that cheerful attitude, it will increase your youthfulness. And so today I'd also like to talk about the home and how to make it more pleasant. But first we have to make you more pleasant, because you set the whole atmosphere for that home. And I especially want to encourage you young mothers not to be impatient with your children, because that also puts a blight on the atmosphere on the whole day, and they feel it sometimes when mother is impatient or angry. And also remember, with children, in dealing with children in the home, they don't have adult minds. We often think that they shouldn't have done something, or maybe they said something or did something that was rude, but they honestly don't know what we know, and they don't know any better. There's no point in being impatient, but you can disciple them, you can teach them, and the best way to teach is a kind and loving manner. Now, that I came from an era where a lot of the parents and grandparents thought that harshness was more effective, but it can be more effective in changing behavior, but that's all it does, is it changes the behavior, not the heart. But this is one of the reasons we homeschool. We want to teach our children with the added dimension of love. For example, there are many things that I remember so much better, even in mathematics, when I learned it from my father. When he taught me my times tables, I warmed to them better because of him. And so we want to teach our children with love, and we want to not do it the way the world does. The New Testament, Ephesians 6, says, bring your children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And you need to learn what that is. And it is kindness, and it is goodness. And to train and teach them means you have to disciple them. And disciple them means you tell, and then they follow, and they do what you do. And a lot of times our impatience and our temper is a result of many things combined: lack of rest, lack of prayer, lack of exercise, lack of good nutrition, maybe being on our feet too long, lack of love, maybe not stopping to think where that child came from and what a blessing, what a miracle that child is, and also how we are training them to train their own children by the way that we do it, by the way we teach them. So be kind and loving and be gentle. And you can be firm without being overly harsh. So in the home, you don't want to, we used to say, my day is just ruined. But you can ruin your own day just by your own attitude. And that's why I suggest you get dressed and you go get yourself refreshed. And if you need to, that's a good time also to pray and to ask God to be with you and ask God to be with your home and to give you good success. Now, one of the things that I'm working on is trying to focus more on the home and less on troubles out there and less on the media, because they're never going to let us go, They're never going to make us happy. And so I'm reminded of Mrs. Elton in Emma. Do you remember this quote? Sometimes I listen to these DVDs while I'm working, and I pick up some of these quotes. And of course, it's kind of a comedy, but this one was quite serious. I was blessed. Mrs. Elton, remember the preacher's wife? She said, I was blessed with so many resources within myself. The world was not necessary to me. I could do very well without it. I want to get to that point where the world and all of its trappings and attractiveness and their shopping and all those things are not necessary for me, because I can do very well without it. And if we can learn to be do-it-yourselfers and do a lot of things at home, if you're just starting out, it's understandable that you will need to supply your home and to furnish it, and it will entail some shopping. But if you're elderly like I am, perhaps you can think of ways to do without and spend more time at home and get your life together, go through your archives, go through your books, go through all of your memories, and go through things that maybe you have been neglecting because while you were raising your children, you were just on the go and life happened. So I am aiming for this sentiment, and that is, the world was not necessary for me. I could do very well without it. And I'd like to challenge you today not to listen to or read any media news. It's all going to work out, God's going to work it out, and He does listen to our prayers. He does answer our prayers. And the more time you spend on the latest media report, the less time you are going to be spending on prayer, on teaching your children. And those of you whose children are gone, you can still teach them, you can write to them, and you can influence them in so many ways. It's not over, you know that. And you are still teaching into the next generation, and you don't really realize it, but even by your actions at home, even by getting up and getting yourself prepared, there's a teaching in that. People are going to notice. Your family will notice that. And so when my descendants come to see me, I always make sure I'm in proper form, because I don't want to appear to have gotten neglectful or less energetic about life just because I'm not raising them anymore. But they don't know it. I still am. And so today also we want to talk about the house and how to make it your own ministry. I talked about last time in the last video about young girls that want to go on not just young girls, other people get ideas that they want to just leave all their work behind and go on a ministry somewhere where they can be appreciated or where they can be used, and they don't understand that you could use your energy and all that time and money. Ministries just gobble up money. They're very expensive, and you could probably put it into your home and make it worthwhile at home and turn it into a ministry. Have you ever thought of maybe looking at one section of a house that needs to be cleaned and thinking, I'm going to do more than just clean that up. I'm going to turn that into a kind of a relaxing area that has a if you will, a message to it. And that sounds rather strange, but to do more, to put your heart into it, to put a little bit more into it. And you might not think that anyone cares, but you just wait. Maybe God will send someone. And you will be so glad that you did it to perfection. I have a little thought for you, and here it is. One small positive thought in the morning can change your whole day. I found somebody gave me a little magnet, and it said, "Do something today that is worth repeating." Isn't that clever? So I saved that, and I think it's really good as you can find them to write little sayings and think about them, because one positive thought in the morning can change your whole day. Well, maybe it can't change the day, but it can embellish it and it can improve it. It's just like having happy sparkles all around you while you work. Now, I do have one other thing to read to you. It is not happy people who are thankful. It's thankful people who are happy. You don't start out happy. You have to have all the things and the ingredients that produce happiness. Remember the book that I read parts of to you by Linda Lichter called Simple Social Graces, or she also had a reprint of it called The Benevolence of Manners. And in it, she talked about the Victorians, the people of, I'm not talking about the state of Victoria in Canada or the state of Victoria in Australia, but the people that lived during the Victorian era of Queen Victoria's life, and how, in general, their personalities and their character was centered on doing the things that resulted in happiness, not sitting around caring about their feelings. When you do that, then you're trying to find out answers to the symptoms. But they would be puzzled, she said, at our wanting to achieve happiness, because they weren't concerned about that. They were concerned about doing the right thing and forging forward in life and thriving and producing and getting something done and raising happy families and having a way to earn a living. They were more concerned about that than they were concerned about just having the feeling of happiness. And so I think that's really important to know, that whenever you feel uneasy, whenever you feel despondent, whenever you're feeling like you don't have any courage, that it's really important to just start doing something that would be beneficial to yourself, to your home, to your family, and also to remember to turn to God in prayer whenever these feelings come to you. Sometimes in the home it can get that way because, first of all, you don't have a boss over you telling you every move to make. You have to be really, really self-reliant and independent, because you have to make your list, and you have to have sense to know what needs to be done first. I've always recommended that the first things you do in the home during the day would have to do with being clean and sanitary and healthy. Make sure your fridge is clean, your laundry room is clean, your laundry is done, and the bathroom is sanitized and clean, and other things. It's basically a big sanitation project, isn't it? But everyone is happier when things are in order, and that also creates a lot of peace and happiness. I don't know how many times I've had my descendants come and see me, and then when they leave, it's so quiet, and everything's kind of in, it needs to be redone, because all the bedding needs to be washed and everything needs to be put back in order. And I would wait. I would feel very sad and really miss them. It felt very empty, and I would wait until the next day to get started on it. Well, now what I have been doing is, just as soon as they leave, as soon as that door is shut, I start picking up and cleaning and putting it back in order, because it balances my mind and it takes away that feeling of being left. And years ago, I found out that if Mr. S was going on a trip, and we were left behind, that it was good for us to go out too and go somewhere when he left, just to keep that feeling away. And so, but now what I'm doing is staying home and fixing it up real quickly because it helps my mind. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the home and the family, and I wanted to talk a little bit about propriety too for men. We don't talk about that very much, do we? But that'll be in the people part here. And so one thing I noticed, that there is a time of day in which people, especially women at home, can feel a little bit nervous or anxious and not know why. And I was feeling that right after everyone had left, after I had a big thing going on here with my family, and everyone had gone their separate ways and left, gone to their homes. And I have a lace curtain that I had pulled, and it had given me so much peace. And now I kind of figured out the lace curtain thing, and that is that it softened those evening shadows. And when those feelings come in the afternoon or evening of, there's a change going on in the earth, in the atmosphere, and in the temperature, and in the light. And a lot of people pick up on that, and it makes them a little bit uneasy for some reason. And even children, they'll start crying around 5 in the evening. And but you know, those lace curtains helped so much that now I'm really convinced, that the lace had a reason for it, and it softened everything. So that's just one of my observations. And how can we know about these things unless we take some time and sit in our houses and feel what it's like to sit in one little section of it? I lived in an old, I think it was called Miniature Southern Colonial House in Texas on a ranch. And it was built back in the 1930s. And I noticed that at a certain time in evening, the sun would come over the left shoulder, and that would have been, and it was a tall, narrow window, and there would have been a little chair there, maybe with the lady's sewing basket, and she would have sat there or read or wrote letters. And how every area of that house had an atmosphere a certain time of day, and that the light came in at a different time, and how each room could have been used for a certain thing. And I think we do need to sit in our houses more and observe the light and observe the feeling of each room. And so we want to go on then to this propriety thing, and a little bit about religion. And where shall I start? Well, I think I'll start with the people part here. I hope that you're getting a few things done. And so I want to start out here. And the reason I'm reading this verse, it's 1 John chapter 4, and I believe it's verse 20. Okay, the reason I'm reading this is I mentioned young girls wanting to go off on mission work, but especially when they don't get along with their families, and it's a way to get away from everybody, and it can alter their lives in many ways. That we could go into that sometimes, but the best mission work is in your own home and through study. And I will mention a couple of books that might be helpful, and because these books have assignments in them that you could do in a practical way without just studying all the time, but it's a doing thing. Well, here it is. If anyone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. This is a verse that has come to my head an awful lot, because being a preacher's wife over the years, and being in the church, and seeing how people act sometimes, and you have to teach everybody because they don't always know. They can be really nice to their brethren sometimes, I mean, at church, be really nice to strangers. They always have to be very friendly to strangers, and they're very attracted. People are very attracted to newcomers and want to help people and just want to live, let their light shine for other people. But when they come home, they can be quite snarly with their own children, with the brothers and sisters at home, with their parents, and that's extremely hypocritical. And so it says here, it's a lie. It's a lie. If anyone says, I love God, that would be, you go to church, you worship God, and you're telling everyone in your singing and in the praying that God is good. God is wonderful. It's glorious to be a Christian. And we should all love each other, and you're shaking hands or hugging people, and then you come home and you're snarly towards your little brother, or you backtalk your mother, or or if you were a parent or a father or even a minister. I've seen ministers come home and tear up their own families because they're so cranky when they get home, but yet all morning at church they've been telling everybody how great God is and how loving and kind God is. And so they fail the message didn't get into them, and they fail. And so we can't do that. You want to save the world, but you can't be kind and loving to your own family. And this is a very important ministry, to learn to do that. And everyone has to learn it. It doesn't come sometimes naturally to some people, but it can be learned. And parents especially, and mothers and grandmothers, can teach their children and children's children to love each other in the home. This is the most important thing, and surely we have discovered that in captivity, because everyone was captive with their own kin, and they would have to learn how to get along at home and how to survive around each other without getting on each other's nerves. And everybody is different, every family is different, they all have different habits, but to learn to love one another at home is the greatest ministry. It's better than raising money and going to the furthest place on the earth and teaching someone. We really don't have to do that so much anymore, because we have the internet, we have Zoom, we have different ways, we have mail, we have so much better communication. You don't really have to leave, and you can still stay home and minister to your family. You can get a Bible study going with someone. I believe it's World Video Bible School or World Bible School that has a Bible study that you can. They pair you up. It's kind of like they pair you up with a teacher, with a student, someone who wants to study the Bible, and you can do it online, and you can do it on Zoom. So there are many ways that you can help others and teach others. But I think it's very important to show piety at home. And the home has been the most neglected place. In fact, the captivity was a blessing, because many people came home and realized how much attention their houses, the structures needed, how much attention their children needed, how much attention their parents needed. Okay, so I also have an old, this may be quite a long thing today, but I wanted to show you this picture, and it's an old, I guess you would call it an old print from an old book. I don't even know what book it was, but as you can see, this man is being very kind to this lady, and his masculinity is in stark contrast to her sweet femininity. And so my daughter copied this off for me because it would have been just such a good thing to read, but she put some notes in here, and I want to read some of the notes here. This is called A Woman's Manner in 1868. It's from a magazine called The Ladies' Repository, June 1868. Now, the writing is a little bit different from how we would write, so you have to stop and think a little bit what they're saying. Now, she starts out by saying, we tend to read vintage articles like these as though through a modern lens. You've got to be really careful how you think when you read these, because they weren't thinking the same thing we are. We tend to read vintage articles like this through a modern lens and declare the mores of the time anti-educational. How many times have you heard that if you're a homemaker, you want to just be a homemaker, you want to homeschool your children, you want to stay home, that you are anti-educational, and that men who really want to have a wife and mother at home are anti-educational. And unfortunately, women have been institutionalized to the point that people think of them as being in an institution, going to college or going to work, but never in the home. Or they wanted women, we tend to think they wanted women who were stupid so that men could be superior. And that's an attitude, that every time someone thinks of the Victorian period, they think of, and the reason I use the Victorian period is it was the last era before my time. And many of us who are elderly now had grandparents that lived during Queen Victoria's reign. Not that she reigned over any of us in the Western world, but she it's commonly called the Victorian era because it was a time of great freedom and invention, and just the opening up of the West, and settlement and discoveries and exploration. So, however, a careful reading, I believe, shows that this is not what the author is about. The author complains of voice and temper, and men not wanting wives too much like themselves. It doesn't mean they didn't want her to read or write or think. One needs to read to the end of the article to get the whole point. Okay, so now I'm going to start the article, A Woman's Manner in 1868. Now, I hope you're getting a lot done. If ever there was an age when women were made much of, idolized, brought forward, developed in every possible capacity, almost deified, in fact, this is the age. No woman gets a chance to hide her talent in a napkin nowadays. It is brought out, skewered up, polished, graven, set on an exhibition table for everyone to look at and admire. Even in 1868, they were generally upset that women were so much more outspoken, and saying that by bringing her out and setting her on display, that she was missing out on a lot at home and a lot of appreciation at home. If she does not reach perfection now, physically and mentally, she never will. And yet there were women too, whose names and memories make our blood stir with a thrill of instinctive pride, even through the silence of dumb centuries, before the days of calisthenics and gymnasiums or female colleges existed, and when any science, beyond the daily page of reading, immortalized by the Vicar of Wakefield, was as a sealed book to them. We could hardly improve on some of those old-fashioned models with all our modern improvement. You see, even then, and I was reading in Linda Lichter's book about how the Victorians were entering an era that was going to be a fast pace of life, and that they were suffering somewhat from it. And I always imagined that was one of the things that the elderly could see, that their way of life was fast disappearing in the slow, methodical, purposeful way of life. I've seen a lot of people restoring this, though, all by themselves. Young people going and living more slowly and deliberately and appreciating every movement of their lives. Still, we are not altogether satisfied. We have gathered the fruit, mellowed, ripened, and perfected, but the bloom is somehow rubbed off. We are like poor Frankenstein, not by any means exactly suited with the result of our labors. Now, here is the trouble. Our women are educated, refined, charming, no doubt, but they are not womanly women. We miss the nameless grace, the indescribable charm that should characterize a woman as entirely and inseparably as fragrance characterizes a rose. Somehow, in the great crucibles of education and development, this strange sweet essence has vanished and is gone. Nobody knows how, when, or where. Now, a lot of Christians are put off of this word charm because the proverb says charm is deceitful. But they are not using it as a meaning deception. It just means graceful. When they say charm, it just means something that's appealing or graceful and has a totally different meaning. So the comment that my daughter gives me is, they're not saying they should be ignorant, but pointing out that they have lost their softness, their kindness, their charm. If we were a man, one of those curious compounds of strength, weakness, energy, and helplessness, and intellect, that so sorely need a second self by way of a balance wheel, where should we look for a true wife? For something that would be more than a mere ornament, better than a trained parrot. We are afraid we should be worse off than Diogenes with his lantern. And here's the comment. How many liberal trained parrots we have now. We should not want a wife too much like ourselves. Note the too much like ourselves. We should learn to dread the woman who defies us with our own logic, who out-talks us on our own ground, and who pitched her voice in a semitone above ours, and who, in short, carried the doctrine of equality right into the domestic hearthstone. Imagine such a woman by our sickbed. Fancy coming home to such a woman after a day of discouraging failure, of depressing business. If there was such a clubhouse within 10 miles, we would flee to it as a city of refuge. There is much harsh judgment pronounced in the world. A man who is a brute, who spends his evenings away from home. What then is the woman who has failed to make that home attractive and whose voice and temper make it hideous instead? Note the voice and temper. That's a hard one. I once had a voice that no one could hear because it was so, it wasn't developed, and so when my children were little, they couldn't hear me, and so I started to enunciate more carefully and be a little more firm and even raise the pitch. And because I didn't feel I was being taken seriously, and it's awful hard to go back to that soft voice after you've developed a harsh one. Too little attention is paid to the manner of woman in the 19th century. Okay, here's her comment. This is what I think the author is getting at. All this education, but very little education in manners. I would say if you're homeschooling your children, and I'm homeschooling you, you start with manners and grooming. Just start doing that. Get yourself a good manners book and a grooming book. I've mentioned several of them over this past year. And just take yourself on a course of it. And start taking care of yourself and good grooming, and start watching your manners. And this isn't just manners of movement, but it's manners of what you say and what's the right thing to say, and how to be quiet, and how to prevent an argument, and how to keep from constantly contradicting and correcting people all the time. That is really grating, isn't it? Have you ever known anyone that you could not get on any kind of a smooth conversation with because she had to correct every single thing you said and talk back to you? And it could be that she didn't know any better. She probably thought that's the way you have a conversation. Maybe they did that when she and her siblings were young. Maybe that's how they communicated. But it doesn't fare well in the adult world, and it isn't very pleasant, and it can really put your mood on edge. We never stop to think that this manner is the letter of introduction they carry with them into the world. When you think about that, to have a kind and gentle manner and to be well-mannered what it means is don't get into things that are not yours. Don't interrupt a conversation that is not your business, or if someone's not talking to you. And just general things, saying please, saying thank you, saying you're welcome, just general little things. And I think when we're young, sometimes we look down on these little small talk things because we think they're not important business. And when we're young, we want to be smart. But going back to those little things, little pleasantries like how is the weather, and how are you doing, how are you feeling, and just nice pleasant talk, and making those full of meaning. And that can also warm your heart. Maybe you miss your loved ones, maybe you miss your kids, or maybe you miss your mother, raising your own children, you miss your mother and father. And when you learn these pleasantries with people, they can make you feel a little bit more fulfilled. You won't understand it unless you try it, but just little niceties. They are the letter of introduction, and you carry them with you into the world, that by the touchstone of manner they will most assuredly be judged. And it is so difficult to watch this impalpable of all feminine charms, to prune away redundancies and cultivate deficiencies. It also applies to men, and I want to get into propriety for men too, because I have noticed even in restaurants over the years, some men are so demanding of the waiter and the servants to come to his table, motioning constantly, calling out for them to come to the table. And that to me is very crude. And of course we expect it of some people. But for women it is even worse. It somehow demeans them worse. And one cannot actually explain it, but you can see it. There is but a step between confiding frankness and unpleasant boldness, between vivacity and pertness, between simplicity and silliness. Yes, that would take some time to describe that. There is a step between simplicity and silliness. It's like saying there's a fine line between being just simple and plain and being silly. There's a fine line between confiding someone in an open and honest manner and being unpleasantly bold, saying things you should not say, things of a personal nature, bodily functions, talking about unpleasant things while people are eating, or just in general in public. There is a fine line between vivacity and pertness, a fine line between simplicity and silliness. We have no sympathy with the prudish damsel who confines her conversation to just yes or no, and looks upon all men as destroying demons, to be kept at arm's length or looked at through a grating. Yet is it not the other extreme still worse? Over being overly friendly. The tendency of the age is toward too great freedom in social intercourse between men and women. Men should be men and women women. And when a young lady slaps her brother's friend on the back and calls him old fellow, the result is most unpleasant confusion of ideas. Back then, and having read Linda Lichter's book, Simple Social Graces, The Benevolence of Manners, she mentioned something like this on how they missed the woman having propriety and not being so bold, so open, and how embarrassed they were by this. Boy, they would be really talking now, wouldn't they? Freedom of manner in public is another national fault. Schoolgirls of 16 enter public conveyances with the confidence of young men. They look you boldly in the eye, press forward to a seat with the greatest sang-froid, and converse across the aisle in a loud, self-assured voices and about the party last night and the surprise tomorrow night, as if everybody was vitally interested in their concerns, as they themselves are. They eat peanuts and throw the shells past you out the window, with an accuracy of aim that makes you nervous. They clean and trim their nails, or perhaps pick their little white teeth as they talk. Yet, were you to call them unladylike, how shocked and surprised they would be. You see, they don't think. Carelessness is the trouble. Utter reckless lack of thought. Girls do think. As they verge from 16 towards their 20s, new perils beset their way. Their tendency is to become abrupt, quick-motioned, hard-voiced, and fast. They pride themselves on an independence which is but another name for coarseness. That's coarseness, C-O-A-R-S-E, coarse, meaning roughness. With the pure well of English undefiled, from which Milton sang and Goldsmith wrote, as an heritage to their tongues, they express themselves in language befitting a stable yard or a billiard saloon. They glory in the newest slang, the choicest repertoire of what Victor Hugo calls argot. They have respect for the sweet low voice that Shakespeare loved, but hail you across the drawing room as if you were somewhere out at sea, and speak from between their eyebrows metallically and sharp. Things haven't changed, have they? And when the sweet old story of love and courtship weaves itself into the chapter of their lives, how do they comport themselves? They get engaged for the fun of things, not because they ever intend to ratify the solemn compact before the altar. It is no new thing to hear of a young lady saying, "Oh, she's been engaged 5 or 6 times." This is what was in Wives and Daughters. Remember Cynthia, the stepdaughter that came to live, and Molly's life was so placid, and she'd never had a cross word between her and her father, never saw anybody slam a door, never saw a girl in the height of emotion. And she had grown at a rational rate, and she was normal and pleasant and natural. And Cynthia came in, and of course, I think she was engaged 5 or 6 times. And you have to explain this story if you're watching it on as a movie. You have to explain it if you're watching it with young people, and explain these characters. Watch it and get familiar with it and explain it. Otherwise, they might think somebody like Cynthia, who was so vivacious, was more fun, and that somehow she was better and having a better time. We hardly blame gentlemen for amusing themselves at the expense of such women as these. People make jokes about people like that. And lately we have been surprised and shocked to observe the total lack of delicacy with which young ladies parade their conquests before the world. If a man asks a woman to marry him and is mortified by a refusal, has he not got the right to take it for granted that she will keep this a secret as honorably as if it were guarded by the most solemn vows of silence? What then can we think of a woman who boasts of their rejected lovers, as Indian chieftains carry scalps in their belts, and bring the most solemn episodes of life into the idle chatter of every day? Some things need to be kept quiet, especially conversations you've had with other people. And don't go around telling people things that someone did that they're embarrassed with. You don't want to embarrass them again. It is as dishonorable as if they had stolen money or forged bills. You can demand some sort of satisfaction from a man, but when a woman's tongue is the criminal, what redress have you got? Shall we allow the manner of American women to degenerate into mere mannerisms? There's a difference between manners and mannerisms. Mannerisms are movements of the body and expressions. And manners are being kind and polite and being appropriate at the right time, talking at the right time, keeping your voice modulated. Remember in Wives and Daughters, when Cynthia came, or when Molly said something, and she was a little upset, her stepmother, her new stepmother, said, "Modulate your tone, dear." You know, I wish that I had grown up with all the manners courses that were available now. I wished I had grown up with that. I could have done so much with that. Is there to be no dividing line between the language used on a race course and that of our young ladies? Are girls to be distinguished from their brothers only by accident of dress? It is all very well for women to know how to take care of themselves, but there is a stage where their independence becomes repulsive. It is right that women should develop all their powers and faculties, both of mind and body, but they have no business adopting those of a man. Now I'll read what my daughter commented here. Again, this isn't a phrase to indicate that the author thinks man should be superior. On the contrary, a correct reading shows that they are saying manners of a man are worse, and it would be sad if women stooped to it. Feminists have a fit, but they lose out on both sides. You see, it's one thing for a man to be coarse. It seems to be natural for him to be rough. But for a woman to be rough, she has to come down a step. And Peter Marshall talked about this in his sermon called... Goodness, I can't think of it. It's probably on the tip of your tongue. I even typed it out one time. And it was about the Keeper of the Springs. I think I might have that on my blog somewhere if you want to go and read that. We are weary in hearing impertinence called frankness, coarseness defined as independence, masculine boldness defined into the place of a proper spirit. When once a woman ceases to be truly feminine, she loses all claim to the chivalrous courtesies which are universally awarded to her by man without gaining the respect due to a man. Mothers, it is in your hands to make the manner of American women the most charming in the world. Daughters, it is for you to discountenance the bold flippancy of the day, and study a manner that shall clearly and fully represent the white soul and sunny nature within. And it's interesting they talked about the soul here. You know, we always used to talk about sullying your soul or blackening your soul and being careful not to harm your soul. And I know a lot of people would judge you if you're not vivacious and happy and I would say outgoing and friendly. And they may call you conceited or they may call you rude, but it is never good to jeopardize your soul. And so it's better to learn propriety. And I thought it was interesting that they said, it is in your hands to make the manner of women the most charming in the world. Of course, they use the word charming. That is not the deceitful charm that the Bible speaks of. It is the most attractive and the most well-loved. Daughters, it is for you to discountenance the bold flippancy of the day, and study a manner that shall clearly and fully represent the white soul and sunny nature within. If, standing on the threshold of life and the world, you pray for it, let it not be for beauty, or brilliant intellect, or fascinating tongue, but for a woman's womanly nature, and a nature that shall be its interpreter. Cleopatra herself could not wage successful rivalry against such a gift. You know, we've been programmed from the time we're really young to either be smart or be well-spoken or even have be famous, and yet the woman at home and the femininity of a woman and her sweetness is never praised. And this is, in fact, sometimes it is ridiculed even in the home, her kindness. To be Queen of Hearts, a woman needs only be sympathetic, tender, soft voice, with faith, hope, and love templed in her soul. Men see of the dark and tempestuous side of life in their daily existence. Their homes should be shrines wherein to gather new strength and recognize holier types. Their wives should be in the world but not of it. It is not necessary for a woman to stand alone, defying the world. There are sufficient strong arms to fight the battles for her. Her strength lies in the very weakness of her slighter nature and more delicate frame, and the charm, subtle and sure, of a feminine manner is a more potent spell than ever any enchanter ever wove. That's not to promote a spell or an enchantress. That is a figure of speech to describe how much more powerful a holy woman with faith in God, who cares about her soul and the soul of others, how much more power that has than a potent spell ever woven by an enchanter. Let us not fall into apathy on a subject of such importance. The evil is rapidly advancing. The remedy cannot be too soon applied. Now, this was written in 1868 when people were alarmed at how women were acting in public in boldness and in loudness and in just shrillness, and also it even affected the way that they dressed. So I'm going to go from there to Beautiful Girlhood. Now, Beautiful Girlhood was written in, I'm trying to think, 1940 by Mabel Hale. And here's another book I wish I'd had, but my daughter had it. But, you know, ladies, it's not too late for us oldies and elderly people. Get yourself this, and then this one's called The Companion to Beautiful Girlhood. I have had this on here before, but I'm going to go into it with depth today. Maybe you could get a lot more done. And I hope I can cover everything that I have here. But before I get into Beautiful Girlhood, I want to get into propriety of men. There are articles like this written in the 1800s where they chastise the men just as much for being brutish, for not being careful, for not being polite, especially around women. So one of the things I want to mention is something that I know something about, and that's because I'm a church lady and I've been a preacher's wife for almost 50 years. I want to mention this, propriety for men of all ages. And this is the reason I want to go back to the tipping of the hat and the bowing of the head between men and women, so they don't have to get too familiar. They don't have to get too close. There doesn't have to be a hug. There doesn't have to even be a handshake. I wouldn't mind handshaking so much if we all wore gloves like in the olden days. And I think probably the reason I have such a caution about all that is because I have more people, being a preacher's wife and being in a church every single Sunday, there are more people to shake hands with. And whereas the average person might not have that many. And so that's why I try to curtail it. And so let me talk about propriety for men of all ages. We've just been through an era where people were just getting overboard with hugging, getting overboard with familiarity, with touching, with just going. And I saw it in the youth groups. We don't have youth groups, but I've seen it and heard about it in youth groups. And I was happy that the only youth group we had was our own children, our own family. And sometimes we'd get together with other families that had youth, and we would have a dinner together, or we'd have an evening just for them. But we didn't have a youth group or a youth minister. But I did notice that in society in general, not so much in churches, there was a lot of familiarity between the boys and the girls. And the Bible talks about and teaches young men not to touch the young women, but to treat them like sisters or mothers, and to be careful not to be too familiar with them. And it was just a safety measure. And so propriety for men in churches especially, when you have deacons or you have somebody that's assigned to go out and deliver something, deliver food or deliver some kind of help to other members of the church, if he's going to see a woman, this has just been generally the rule over the years. People have learned the hard way. He should take a woman with him. He should take his wife with him, or send her if it's a woman that she has to deliver things to. Or if it's a couple, maybe they should go as a couple. But also they need to be very, very careful not to go around being too familiar with other ladies in the church. And women too have to be careful. You know, there are some people that will take a a kindness or a hug just a little too far because they feel they're misunderstood at home, or they feel lonely, or they're just desperate for some kind of approval, and so they might take that too far and just go overboard for someone. And a woman who's just being kind might be rather astonished about it. But we all need to be careful. And in this book here, Beautiful Girlhood, there's a chapter on that, on how we have to be our brother's keeper. We are somewhat responsible for the way some of the men respond. I see I'm losing my light here. And so no man should go to a door where there's women there only by himself without taking his wife or mother with him or his daughter. And also to be careful not to pay more attention to one woman than any of the other women in the church. Because, you get in a group or even a small group, and people are always looking for gossip, looking for rumors, and you want to cut down on the rumors. You want to cut down on any possibility that you could compromise someone too by showing too much attention to them. And this goes both ways. But I think especially men have to be very careful these days because they could be accused of anything. I remember one time an elderly woman asked one of my grandchildren, and he was about 12, to take her bags and her Bibles and things and put them in her car after church. And I caught him on the way out. I said, "Don't do that. Just set that down here and let her do it." Because what happens is you could be accused of stealing something. You could be seen opening the door of her car and putting something in. And then maybe something happens later on, and the last thing people remember is, oh, he put something in that car. You just don't know. It's just better to let people take care of themselves, and if they need help, they can call on someone maybe that's not as easily compromised. And for instance, that's another thing too that I've noticed. Sometimes men will pay attention to a woman who's pretty, or who's vivacious, or who's real friendly, or who's affectionate in the church, but they won't pay any attention to the wrinkled old elderly bent over woman. And so that's when you know that maybe he's being a little bit inappropriate, and it's better to catch it before rumors and things get going, because it can really be very hurtful. So in general, propriety for men is the same as propriety for women. They shouldn't be overly friendly. They should be rather formal. And always, the wonderful thing about being married is you can always have your wife cover for you. She's always by your side, and that prevents any rumors from going around because she was there. And so also, there is a danger too in handshakes. And of course, I've been in the church for a long, long time, and in general have found it a pretty healthy situation. But every once in a while, there'll be some man that just wants to hang on to your hand a little bit longer than the other person wants it to. And this has to be careful. There is a course for boys and men that talk about the handshake and just how many seconds you count, so many seconds, and that's it, and then you let go, because other than that, it will feel like it's a little bit more than it should be. Like I said, I'm ready for coming back to the tipping of the hat and the little bow, the little polite bow. So there is harm in being too friendly and too familiar, and we're just coming out of that familiar, friendly era where we might go back and be a little bit more like the Victorians, who, it seems, only smiled at their loved ones. They didn't just go down the street smiling at everybody. They saved their smiles for the most important people in their lives. There are old black and white videos you can get of early film of the Victorian era, and it shows men and women walking up and down the streets of London and New York, and you can see the expressions on their faces, or San Francisco, and see the expressions on their faces. And although pleasant and relaxed, they weren't going around flashing a smile at everybody. And of course, I could just see my detractors saying, Mrs. Sherman says we shouldn't smile anymore. They always like to exaggerate, so. So now, I have spoken for an hour now, but I do want to read a little bit of Karen and Andriola, who has revised the book by, let me just see, who did I say this was? Mabel Hale. So I'll read the introduction to the companion guide. Now the companion guide was written by Shelley Noonan and Kimberly Zack, and what they've done is they have just turned it into a workbook. You still have to have this. And then in chapter 1, she has some lines and she has questions and practical, so you can make it into a practical experience. So let me read the introduction. Dear friends, Beautiful Girlhood, written by Mabel Hale in the 1940s for girls entering womanhood, has become a classic in homeschooling circles. So if I were homeschooling you, I would have you order Beautiful Girlhood and then the Beautiful Girlhood Companion, because you probably missed out on it and it's not too late for you. And it wouldn't hurt, it just wouldn't hurt to do it. And I'm going to read a couple of things. It even has a chapter on homemaking in here. So perhaps I could read a little bit more of it next time. A revised version was later adapted by Karen Andriola from the original. This companion guide can be used with either book, although Hale's book contains one more chapter. 5 years ago, my daughter Laura and I discovered this book and the value it had for our relationship. Our special time would begin with a cup of tea. As we took turns reading the chapter we would later discuss. It was a way for us to escape the hum of daily life to a time when I could teach with intent the values and principles I found important. It was also an opportunity for her to ask questions and think about the issues that she would soon face as a young girl on the brink of womanhood. The companion guide to Beautiful Girlhood was birthed from this priceless experience. Our vision for this guide has been to create a flexible tool for a mother to use while teaching her daughter important life lessons. The questions are organized so that after you read the chapter together, you can talk about the wisdom it contains. The Bible study and activities were designed to support the topics in this chapter. The Bible study could be done at that time or separately. Finally, the quotation and journaling aspects of this guide is a medium to encourage the daughter to think about what she has just learned and make it her own by articulating her thoughts. This written record of her young womanhood should be a priceless keepsake in later years. Okay, so I want to read the questions to you because I have just selected one of the chapters and it was on a conversation on dress, because I start out wanting to tell you to get ready and to get yourself in a good mood to do your homemaking. So, a conversation on dress. So, this is a question. She says, Mother, why do you want me to dress modestly? And so she says, so her mother answers the question. One of the first evidences of a real lady is that she should be modest. By modesty, we mean that she shall not say, do, nor wear anything that would cause her to be gaudy, ill-bred, or unchaste. There should be nothing about her to attract unfavorable attention, nothing in her dress or manner that would give anyone an excuse for vulgar comment. When we dress contrary to the rules of modesty, we give excuse for unwholesome thoughts in the minds of those who look at us. And every girl who oversteps these bounds makes herself liable to misunderstanding and insult, though she may be innocent of any such intention. Now, this is where she teaches in here that we are responsible for our brother, to be our brother's keeper. We're supposed to treat men like brothers. And so we wouldn't want our brothers to stumble or to think impure thoughts. And so that's why generally we dress in an appropriate manner. And so she has a whole narrative here that you have to read, which you'd have to read yourself. So I really recommend that you get this book. We'll start with the first chapter and also the questions. So I want to read the questions from this companion book that someone else wrote, Conversation on Dress. What guidelines does the author offer for modest dress? Perhaps your mother could discuss what her position on clothing is and set some guidelines. Take a mental look at your clothing and ask the following questions. Are your clothes modest? Do they reveal too much? Do they cause a stir or startle people? Would a modest woman wear this? Could I give anyone the wrong idea with this item of clothing? Am I causing people to make base comments when wearing this? What are the reasons that support dressing modestly? So here's the activities and application. Modesty is an expression of our inner attitude. Read Proverbs 7 and list the characteristics displayed in this woman. The woman in Proverbs 7 is dressed like a harlot. What do you think she is wearing? Memorize 1 Peter 3, 3-6. How should we adorn ourselves? 1 Timothy 2, 9-10, 1 Timothy 5 to verse 10. So here's some journal topics. Explain whether or not you are like the person in the first quote. Write how the second quote reveals the beauty of God's creation and how nothing man can create will ever compare. So here are the quotes. Those who make their dress a principal part of themselves will in general become of no more value than their dress. Here's the second one. Let me dressed fine as I will. Flies, worms, and flowers exceed me still. The way that God made things is still more beautiful. So ladies, I hope that this has been interesting enough to you to keep you working, or else maybe it just put you to sleep. But everybody needs some rest. So ladies, I hope that you will leave a comment, and maybe this has inspired you in some way, and maybe you could tell me how. And I hope you got a lot done today. I really appreciate you listing little things that you did while you worked. And one thing I'd like you to do today is to breathe, and to learn to breathe so that you feel it in your throat like you're swallowing something, and learn to breathe in a more relaxed way. Find the beginner's exercise somewhere where you can do 5-minute stretches or something that will loosen up your shoulders and neck. That seems to be one of the things we need the most work on, because our work at home is mostly from the front end. So ladies, I hope you do really well today. God bless you, and I hope to see you more often. Bye.